Hello and welcome to Cinema Chat. Cinema Chat is the podcast where we talk about the movies and the people that made them. And today we are going to talk about Paul Bern. And if you're wondering who Paul Bern was, he was a legendary film producer, writer, and director. And his name is not well known amongst all the many greats that that went on through history. Well, his contribution was fairly brief. He started in the silent era and went on into briefly into the early 1930s before a tragic death. And we'll talk about Paul Bern's movies. We'll talk about his legacy, and we're also going to talk about his untimely death. And how it happened, or how we think maybe it happened. But Paul Bern was definitely a legend, and I talk in this podcast to two really great guests. The first one that you'll hear will be Laura Riebman, and Laura is the grandniece or the great niece of Paul Bern's, and she is trying desperately to get Paul Bern a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which he richly deserves. I mean, he's got, to his credit, the movie Grand Hotel, the last movie he was associated with. Grand Hotel, if you haven't seen it, it is a must-see, and we're going to cover that film in depth in a future podcast. But I really want everyone to listen to this podcast, listen to Laura Riebman, and realize all the passion that she has. And speaking of passion, we've got also another interview with Sherry Snyder, whom we talked with some months ago about the great silent actress Barbara Lamar. And we had a really great conversation about her, and hopefully the consciousness of Barbara has awakened in a few people. Hopefully we can get people to do the same here with Paul Bern. And now Laura again is a relative of Paul Bern's, and then Sherry Snyder is significant because Barbara Lamar, the person that Sherry wrote a book about, she had a lifetime, or not a lifetime, but she had a long-term relationship with Paul Bern, and they were really wonderful friends. And as Sherry states later, Paul had really deep-seated feelings for Barbara Lamar, and so Sherry Snyder is equally passionate about her adoration for Barbara Lamar, and you'll see she also has some passion for Paul Bern. And listen for the story that Sherry Snyder will tell about Barbara getting sick and being in debt. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a great piece of information from Sherry Snyder. So hope you'll enjoy these two interviews. And I do want to preface that I am only an amateur at splicing things together, so I'm doing the best that I can. If something sounds a little clunky, I apologize in advance, but I definitely am doing the best that I can. But thanks so much for listening.
Okay, well, Laura, thank you very much for coming on, and I really appreciate you very much for talking with me today.
Thank you.
And now, first of all, I'll go ahead and say a few things, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about Paul. And of course, Paul Bern, if you don't know, and you're listening to this, he was married to Jean Harlow at the time of his death, and he was also a filmmaker that worked with big names such as Mabel Normand and Paul Negri in his early days, and later went on to work with people like Greta Garbo, John Barrymore, Lionel Barrymore, and Joan Crawford. And now, first of all, I know, Laura, one thing you're trying to accomplish is you'd like to get Paul Bern's name on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, correct?
Yes, that really is one of my goals, that and to sort of reintroduce his legacy to people who aren't familiar with him.
Yeah, and so who was Paul Bern, and why should we honor him?
Well, he started off as many people did, just a young boy that was interested in film, originally thought he would be an actor, and later discovered that that really wasn't his forte, and wound up working behind the scenes and working his way up the ranks, little by little. I mean, he really was discovered very early on. He started working in the time of silence, writing scripts and doing scenarios, and he worked for various film groups before they all merged together, and he eventually worked on over 50 films with a lot of very major, well-known names, and I just think because of the circumstances of his death, he hasn't gotten the regard that he deserves.
Yeah, and of course, we could compare him to somebody that he worked with, which was Irving Thalberg, who also met an unfortunate young death. But why does Irving Thalberg get so much credit and not so much your uncle?
Well, I think possibly only because Thalberg outlived him and was one of the storytellers at Paul's death, but up until his death they were considered dear friends, and he was his right-hand man and worked on almost no project without input from Paul.
Oh yeah, is that right? Wow, that's pretty amazing, because Irving Thalberg is looked at as this pillar, if he would have lived on to see 90 years old, like a lot of the film producers did have, then we would look at him as like probably the biggest of all time if he would have kept living. But yeah, I think you're probably right. And what films did Paul Bern have his hands on the most, do you think? What bigger films anyway?
Clearly he worked on Grand Hotel, that won the third Oscar and came out shortly after his death. He worked on almost all of Jean Harlow's films. He was the one that actually, brought her over from Howard Hughes and made her a big star. So he was clearly involved in all that. He was involved with all of Greta Garbo's films till her death, her first talkie, which was Anna Christie, and he even actually worked in the silent films, which a lot of actors couldn't make the jump from silent to talkies, but to find people worked, because the scripts were written very differently. He actually wrote for the silence and then switched over to the talkies.
Yeah, it's a much different approach. We all know it was a hard adjustment for the actors, but it certainly had to be for writers and for producers as well. And
right, I mean, they had to look at the whole way everything was filmed was different. The actors had to portray, and they had to give much more direction. Where when it was silent, they could be telling the actors what to do during each step, but nobody heard it.
Yes, it really is a marvel for anybody that was able to transition from one to the other. It's amazing. Now there's a few people that really benefited from being able to transition to the talkies, such as I'd say first off the Marx Brothers, W.C. Fields, Laurel and Hardy. Some of those comedy people had an automatic advantage because their words were funny, but when you're talking about somebody with drama, it's a little bit of a different adjustment. Now, one of the interesting things that you told me that I did not know about Paul Bern is that he had his hands on almost every Jean Harlow project. That's something. It's absolutely astonishing that we're not getting that information from IMDb or from Wikipedia. Where do you get your information from where you know that he was involved with so many projects?
Well, I credit a lot of the information to the book that E.J. Fleming wrote, because he did a very, very extensive filmography, and as to whether he wrote for it or he directed or he did the scenario or he was just, looked for information or to revise things. And he looked at trade papers as well as, the notices on top of what was listed on the films. Because a lot of times at that time, apparently, producers didn't get credit for the work. And apparently, Paul really never cared about getting credit.
Yeah. And then, of course, it affects everybody's thought about you for almost 100 years. And so it's. I wish that he would have wanted credit, but yeah, was he pretty much somebody that was humble, or he just? What do you think the purpose was behind?
He was very humble. He really, I think he did the work because it was intriguing to him, and it was mentally and intellectually stimulating. He was very interested in, what went on in people's minds and their motivations, their interests, and he brought that to the films that he made. I mean, he was almost always, they commented on, even if the film wasn't very good, that the production or the effort that he put into the characters was interesting. One of the first things that he wanted to bring to films was, one of the things they did with Grand Hotel was they had multiple storylines going on at the same time, because he felt that the audience was intelligent enough that it didn't have to be one or two characters following the same story. It could be multiple people with multiple intriguing plot lines going on, and that people would be able to follow that and would be much more sympathetic and interested.
Yeah. Do you feel like if he would have known just how great Grand Hotel was, do you feel like he would have advanced his thought process a little bit and wanted to get more credit, or do you think he would have just kept doing what? I know we can't know, but what would you think?
I would think so. I mean, because you think, when they went to the premieres and when it got an Oscar, he certainly would have been there and would have been on stage with the people accepting them. And, when you think of even today, the actors that when they get up there and they thank the producers, the directors, and the script writers, he would have been acknowledged for sure.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about. Obviously, there weren't any TV cameras on Irving Thalberg or anybody else when they were accepting awards and at the Oscars that year, and we don't have any way of knowing, I suppose.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if there are any still photos of that.
Yeah.
I've never thought about that or looked for it.
Yeah, I don't think they knew it was that big of an event at the time, and it'd be pretty great to be able to go back and watch videos of those old movie stars accepting their awards, and we just, I don't think I don't know when we have the first record of it, but I would imagine it's probably the 60s. I don't know that though. But,
yeah, because they did have films and still photos of them at premieres, but I guess you're right. Initially, the awards were not, maybe it was considered more, a closed society thing just for the film people, and then the public became interested. I really don't know the history of it.
Yes. And now going to Paul Bern, the person, now he was affiliated with somewhat of a, let's not get ourselves sued by descendants, but somebody that obviously had some screws loose, Dorothy Mallet, or Millett. How do you say your name?
Millett. I believe it said Millett.
Millett. Yes. What do you know about her?
I don't know a lot. I know that they were involved and that there was a time that, although they were not legally married, they presented, as a lot of people do. They lived together. They thought of themselves as, a couple and husband and wife. At some point, she started having some sort of neuroses, mental breakdown, and was sadly committed to a sanatorium. But again, a point in Paul's favor is, even though their relationship died at some point because she didn't recover, he supported her forever. Until he died. He sent money monthly either through his secretary or to my grandfather, who then helped her out. little bit that I've been able to pick up and read, and it is hard to find solid information about her. She was an aspiring actress, but there really is no mention of any work that she actually ever did, you know. And it could be as Paul became successful, you know, she took a step back.
Yes, it could be. It could be. And what do you now? We have, of course, we go from him being with her, and then he breaks it off because of her emotional issues, right?
You know, I can't even say for sure that they had a conversation that we're breaking up. I think more what happened as time went by and she was not recovering and his opportunities grew, they grew apart and he moved on. But he always felt, you know, some connection to her because he continued to take care of her and recognized that she was a person in need, which was something that really spoke to Paul Bern. I mean, he's well known for taking care of people in need, and, you know, I think somebody who was not all that competent mentally could misunderstand, you know, and think that there was still a connection even though they'd been apart for, like, probably a decade or more. You know, and hadn't lived together. And my understanding is over time, he gradually stopped visiting her. You know, it was normal when things like that happen.
Yeah.
But I doubt they ever sat down and said, you know, and maybe much later on, near the end, they had a conversation, but I doubt he ever said, you know, I'm leaving you, because that probably would have been very distressing to her. And he wanted her to get well, whether she was with him or someone else.
Yes, it's a sad story. It's just there's nothing not sad about the story of the love triangle here involving her, your uncle Paul Bern, and also Jean Harlow steps in the picture, and all three met untimely deaths.
Yeah, very, very sad. That's one of the things that sort of lingers with me the most when I think about the story is, had those tragedies not happened, can you imagine what they would have contributed? You know, I mean, because when you think about what they did in such a short period of time, both their bodies of work are massive, and, you know, they were just a blip on the scene when you think about, you know, 40 years that people worked, 50 years that people worked, and it's hard to imagine what they would have contributed.
Yes, absolutely. We have, you know, obviously not Greta Garbo, but we have Joan Crawford and Betty Davis, who had very lengthy careers in films, and, you know, between the golden age and on into the 70s, basically, all the way to 87 for Betty Davis, or even further than that, if I'm not mistaken. But
well, and you know what? I think the interesting thing with some of the people you mentioned too is when those people left, it was about choice. You know, nobody forced them out. Their lives weren't taken. They decided they were done.
Yeah. In Greta Garbo's case, she definitely checked out. She was done living. But you know, it's one of those things where it's too bad for us, but good for her, because I covered Clara Bow on this podcast a year ago, and it's sad what fame did to her, and I think it was getting to that point with Greta Garbo. I don't know about Jean Harlow. I would like to think that Jean Harlow would have went on and starred in films for 30 or 40 years, and long after her beauty would have abandoned her a little bit, she probably still could have become a better actress, and maybe something really special. Well, we won't ever know, and we won't ever know what Paul Bern's.
No, we've been robbed.
Yeah, we really have.
But of a lot of people.
Yeah, we really have, and it would have been nice. And then you throw Irving Thalberg into the mix. All these people that are in this little circle. It's mind-boggling to think about what we could have had. Yeah, what we could have.
And it's interesting to me if you think about when they started out. Their demises were probably never in their minds.
No, not at all. because we're trying to make it a little more about Paul Bern. And now, how did he die?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I personally think that he was murdered by Dorothy Millette. I think nowadays the majority of people that I've spoken to and what I've read, I think they agree with me. Now, had he committed suicide, it wouldn't change my point of view. I would not look at that as something that was horrible and shameful. Had he committed suicide, anybody who commits suicide gets nothing but sympathy and empathy from me. It's not a smirch on their name to me. I think at that time they used it as to besmirch him and change the storyline, but I believe from everything that I've read and heard that, Dorothy Millette came out there and they were trying to resolve things, that they had tried to, I guess, buy her off is the best way I can say it, set her up with a life independent and where she wouldn't have any need, but, she had her desires, and I don't know what her state of mind was, but, I think it's pretty clear that she was with him the evening that he died, and it doesn't appear to me that he would have killed himself. There was no reason, and, I think it's fairly obvious that things were manipulated and moved around to create a scenario.
Yeah, and you're referring to Louis B. Mayer, I'm sure, right there.
Yeah, well, not only him. There were other people at the scene, and
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, so in other words, people. I see. So am I thinking your theory is similar to mine, which is my theory is she finds out, she being Dorothy Millette, finds out that Jean Harlow is not, is part of Paul Bern's life. Obviously, they're married, and she cannot live with that fact, and so she goes to meet him, and Jean Harlow was not there at the time. That's from reports that I've heard.
Right.
She was not there, and it's almost 100% unlikely that Jean Harlow had anything to do with it. But Dorothy Millette was obviously an angry, jealous lover or ex-lover, and wanted to come back and get her revenge and say, if I can't have him, nobody can. Is that what your thought is too?
Well, I think it's a combination of, in the years preceding when she came out, she had been contacting Paul and in contact with my grandfather and had wanted Paul to revive her acting career. And that wasn't happening. She just wasn't a stable person. And she had delusions about religion and, how she was going to bring religion to the world. And it was a very sad thing. I don't know that probably she still felt slighted that he had married Jean Harlow and, pushed her aside. I don't know if that was all her anger, that she couldn't have him or that he wouldn't help her revive her career. I don't think Jean Harlow had anything to do with it. And I kind of tend to think it was either an accident or an impetuous act. I don't really think she probably went there intending to kill him because he had been offering to help her.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
And why kill herself afterwards? Why jump off a riverboat if, that was something you meant to do?
Right, and that's the thing.
You would then be ranting, well, he took my wife and he wouldn't take my career and he was really my husband. And, you'd stand up and say why you believe those things, why he deserved to be dead.
Yes, and without having all the pieces and trying to think like an investigator, I would think that somebody that's either a jealous lover or B, somebody who thinks I'm going to revive my career and I don't care. That's what I want to do. And then when one of those two things don't get accomplished, which I think you might be onto something. Maybe it was her career she was more worried about. and she knew Paul would be able to she thought that Paul could possibly do it, but yeah, I mean, she went and committed suicide. And how soon was her suicide after Paul Bern's death?
Like the next day or the day, I think it was the next day. I think she drove that evening back to San Francisco and got on a riverboat the next day and jumped off and wasn't found till a couple of days later.
Yeah.
So she immediately left the scene.
Yeah, and we have an impactful Hollywood producer and writer, and we have an ex-lover that wants to get her career revived, and she wouldn't have killed herself the next day if she didn't feel desperate, and
right.
And feeling desperate is one of those things that maybe people have after they are scorned and after they're told, no, you don't have a career. I'm sorry, but I can't do anything for you. And and I'm not being mean when I say this. I'm just saying, if you compare a picture to Jean Harlow and to a picture of Dorothy Millette, I think it would be obvious who the movie star is.
Right. And on top of it, he's saying, and now I've absolutely moved on. You can see that there is no potential for us to get back together. On the other hand, though, you're making me also realize in this moment that say Dorothy shot him on purpose, or what I was going to say is say Paul shot himself, right? She's standing there, and he says, well, if you don't back off, this doesn't make any sense, but then I'm going to shoot myself, right? I'm going to show you all, and I'll take myself out of the picture. Well, wouldn't she be standing there screaming, oh my God, I can't believe he killed himself. I can't believe the man shot himself in front of me. Why did he do that? Instead of running away.
Makes total sense.
She's more likely to be the one that shot him and then ran off.
Makes total sense. And the fact of the matter is Louis B. Mayer, haven't talked very much about the dark side of Hollywood too much on this podcast, but Louis B. Mayer had a firm grip on the Los Angeles Police Department, and then he fixed a lot of things, and I think we'd be horrified if we knew exactly how many things Louis B. Mayer fixed. And it wasn't really him, it was his
henchmen.
Yeah, what's that?
But it's interesting. Well, it's his henchmen, but it's interesting because you use the term the fixers, which is another topic that EJ has written on.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
I believe that's actually the title of one of his other books, that he's delved into that in deep extent, about the people, Whitey Hendry and Strickland, and the coroners, and how they did fix things, then how the movie studios basically had their own police department.
Right, and it's amazing what you can do without mass media. It's the way we have today. They wouldn't get away with it.
You're right. It was a very different time, and to me, that's also one of the things that's very heartbreaking and striking to me is when I think about, we know what people go through now with the paparazzi and being hounded and their faces splashed all over the news. Well, this was kind of up there, with Lindbergh's baby and Marlene Dietrich, and, my grandmother was still being hounded by people who wanted to write about this story. She was in a nursing home in her late 80s and 90s. Yeah, but that's how the story has lived on and on and on. And my grandmother never, ever even spoke about it. And, my uncle actually told me how he found out that Paul Bern died. So Paul was his direct uncle. And they never even spoke about it. It was so deeply disturbing to them. And imagine being hounded. Photos of my grandfather getting off a plane to come to his beloved brother's death where they're besmirching his name. And he said one day, this is my Uncle Raymond, Henry's son, says, well, when is Uncle Paul coming to visit us again?
Oh, dear.
And my grandfather ran upstairs, and my uncle's looking at his mother saying, what did I say? And she had to tell him that Paul had died. And, so they didn't even tell him. He was a small child, but they didn't tell him.
Yeah, that's just too bad. It's really shocking, and when you think about it, it really is. going to the career of Paul Bern, I'm going to. I mentioned he's worked with all these famous actors, and he obviously was side by side with Irving Thalberg, so let's bring this to fast forward to Grand Hotel, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, is that your favorite film of his?
It is. To me, it's the most relatable. I've watched some of the older movies, but, they have a certain datedness to them, and while EJ describes them lovingly, I find them harder to relate to. It's the early movies. It's kind of like watching Silence. But I think Grand Hotel is something it's just relevant today. It's something you can still understand.
Yeah, the acting in that movie is, to me, as good as the acting in any movie that's ever been made, and I say that without reservation. And
it was one of the first all-star ensembles. At that time, a lot of the movies they made had one or two major stars, but this had a lot.
Yes, and that's notable. Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of times, if you look at, and I cover every single era of film in this podcast, and if you go to the early days of Hollywood, you would see a movie with Mabel Normand and three nobodies, and she would carry the whole thing. And
right.
And you'd see maybe Mabel Normand paired with Charlie Chaplin, and then there'd be three more nobodies. And
it was never more than two main stars.
Yes, absolutely. And eventually we get to the point where here with Grand Hotel, it went in a really direct way. It affected what Hollywood did forever, because although we didn't really have what you call we didn't really have in the film. Certainly, Greta Garbo's role is diminished compared to some of the others, but her effect on that film is unbelievable.
Right.
Honestly, I wonder if Paul wrote that line, or if I wonder who wrote that line. It was so.
I have no idea. I don't know whether it was anything that was part of the original. I think it was a play in Germany that it was originally derived from. I don't. It would be interesting, but I think worth note, and one of the things you asked me is Paul's impact, is the story really reflects Paul's desire to present multiple storylines, multiple interesting characters with overlapping and interacting stories happening in one place, and it's interesting because in the beginning they say, basically this is no place, nothing ever happens here. It's really about the everyday lives of everybody, and it's interesting, and that's why I think you still relate to it.
Yeah, it really is an amazing film, and I cherish the storylines in that movie. It's just great. The acting is great, and the writing is great. The lighting, the cinematography is fantastic.
The angles are very interesting.
Yes, it is, and there's just I'm not spoiling the ending of that film, but the ending is great too. Incidentally, I'm not incidentally. I was gonna say something that might spoil it, so I don't want to do that. So I'm sitting there going,
my little inside joke was that I thought was so funny about the movie. You can cut it out if you want, but I think it's funny that the porter's name is Senf, which means mustard in German. So basically, the porter is Mr. Mustard.
Oh my goodness! That I never drew that parallel. Oh my gosh!
I learned German a couple of years ago when we went to Germany. Very, very basic. But that was one of the words I learned, and it struck me as so funny. Then I watched the movie, and I'm like, oh my God, it's Mr. Mustard.
Yes, that's pretty crazy. Well,
and that may be a common German last name, but I've never heard it before.
No, except for Clue.
Right, exactly.
It's kind of funny. That's funny. So we have a guy in Paul Bern that had a really good a really, really big imprint on the history of film, and unfortunately so few people know this. And what I try to do on this podcast is I do try to, I try to talk about and celebrate the history of Hollywood, the last 120 years of it. But sometimes some of that history involves people like Paul Bern that just are kind of faded in the background, and people don't know. I didn't know just how much impact he had until this conversation. So it's really kind of enlightening to be able to talk with you. What else would you like people to know about Paul Bern that we haven't already talked about?
Well, one of the things that I find of interest, and in a way is disturbing to me, but I think I can explain very easily, is some of the character assassination they did on Paul and on my family after he died, saying how, he was very morose and that, there was a streak of depression in the family because his mother drowned. And I do have her death certificate. It was totally an accidental drowning, and people went backwards and tried to imply that, it was an issue when it never was obviously an issue. And they talked about how Paul was involved in such deep intellectual pursuits and the occult. But I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is Paul Bern was originally born Paul Levy, and he changed his name to Bern, as did my grandfather, to honor their dear friend Edward Bernays, who was basically the founder of spin and advertising in the United States. And together they had many, many intellectual conversations on mental psyche, because Bernays was Freud's nephew. And so my grandfather and my great-uncle Paul were friends with Freud and Freud's sister Anna, and so it was normal that they would have talked about these things. It wasn't because of any great depression or morose personality streak. It was fascinating to them. It was very interesting, and it pervaded, his movie making and the way he looked at people and portrayed characters.
Wow, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to think, sadly, people sort of reverse-analyzed it and made it something that it wasn't. It was really just a very interesting, natural thing, not born out of, how they used it to prove why he committed suicide, when it really isn't relevant. I mean, if you look at it, these were his friends. He was friends with the intellectuals of society, and that's what he was interested in, not because he was depressed. Because he was fascinated with people and loved to help people.
Yeah. So he was obviously a very special man, and your goal again is to go back to it is just to right now, well, obviously shed light on his career, but specifically you'd like for him to have his name on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. What all does that entail?
Well, originally my understanding is when it was first developed, they grandfathered in a lot of people, and like Irving Thalberg and Louis B. Mayer, who were his equals, and he really should have been included then. But I found, so you send in an application, and anybody can send in an application for anybody. You can put anybody up for a star, but you send in, background information, why this person is relevant, what they've accomplished and why they should have a star. And then there's a committee that reviews it. And they also, every year, do several posthumous awards. And, of course, Paul's would be a posthumous star. When I followed up and tried to ask why they weren't awarding it, because there's so few, most of the people are current, I really don't get an answer. My feeling is that they just really don't know who Paul is, and I haven't found a way to present to them how much he contributed and how important he was and how much he worked on and how much good work this man did. I mean, he was universally liked. There was not a bad word ever said about that man till the day he died. He was the most beloved person in Hollywood, Hollywood's father confessor. if you were in need of anything, you know, Paul, he sat with people on their deathbeds. He paid for their funerals. You know, he was just a kind man who was caring about other people. And somehow I need to get them to understand that he's very, very worthy of this, that he has a large legacy. It's just not this blip of a name, you know, that's salacious in Hollywood history, but that he really had a deep, long career, and he contributed a lot.
Yeah, and who could we, myself and the listeners, who could we contact, or who could we, how can we help?
Well, if you know anybody that has some kind of connection, you know, that has a name of obviously bigger standing than I do, because I'm nobody to those people. You know, I've contacted people and they've said they support it. Like Director John Waters said he supports it. You know, Stanley Donen said he would support it, you know, but they don't get involved in helping me to do it. And I think what I really need is, I mean, Leonard Maltin said the same thing, you know, of course, I totally recommend him, but I'm not helping, you know, because they have their own projects. I need somebody, some way to make him seem larger than life so that they really understand, you know, the impact he had on so many careers and on all the films that we view today. So anybody that has an interest in Paul, you know, in promoting his legacy so people really understand the body of his work, you know, anybody that has a connection to Hollywood, a connection to the Hall of Fame. I mean, I really think, honestly, he deserves an Oscar for his work, you know, an honorary Oscar, how they've done for some people, for all he contributed and for the Grand Hotel.
Yeah, that would.
So I'm looking, and that's why I truly appreciate you taking the time to present this. So, you know, maybe somebody that has an interest that could help me will contact me.
Now, those famous names that you talked about, did you talk to those people personally?
Not really. You know, I've been in contact with Louis B. Mayer's great niece. She's become a friend, and she totally supports this, but she's not really involved with the community anymore. She mostly works on, you know, her family's history, and I've been in contact, like, with E.J. Fleming, who wrote this book, and people who have written other books and who are Harlow historians, and, for example, Sherry Snyder, who, you know, she's Barbara Lamar's by then it really must be, you know, I'm sure there's something I can do, and I'm not giving up, but I just don't know that I have that clout to make it happen.
Yeah, well, I will try myself to dig deep, and you definitely touched my heart today, and
Thank you.
And as did Sherry Snyder, by the way. Who is the connection here why I'm talking with you, because if it wasn't for Sherry Snyder and my podcast with her a while back, and you and I wouldn't be talking tonight. But she's one of my favorite people.
Mine as well. She is one of the kindest, most generous people, and actually we've, you know, discovered some historical information about Paul and Barbara as well, you know, by doing this work together. So, yeah, we actually discovered that Donald Gallery was not Paul Bern's son. Shortly before Donald Gallery died, we were able to do the genetic testing, and I had reached out to them saying, you know, this is silly. Like, if you really are Paul Bern's son, and, you know, I'm Paul Bern's relative, we're family. We should know each other. And they were so excited about it and put me in contact with Sherry, because they said Sherry's doing all this research and she's helping us. And we just became very dear friends working on this and through this discovery. And she really is. She's a very intelligent, driven,
and tireless.
person.
And tireless.
Yeah.
Well, if I know her like I know her, she's probably listening right now and turning red. But we know.
Well, but everything we said was true.
Yeah, we appreciate you, Sherry. And so
very, very much. She's been a good friend.
yeah. No. Let me ask you another thing before we cut this. I wanted to ask you. You said you've been in touch with. I apologize. I forgot her name now. With Louis B. Mayer's grandniece. What's her name?
I'm drawing a blank.
Oh no. Okay. That's okay.
I talked to her. Her name's Alicia.
Okay. I'm more wondering what she says about Louis B. Mayer.
Well, she does not believe that. We have not discussed it a whole lot because it's a sensitive subject, and I have not. I've written back and forth with her. We've had written conversations, which I tend to say I spoke to somebody when I really wrote with them.
Okay, that's fine.
To me, it's like conversation, but other people don't think that. But it's a sensitive subject because her family contributed an awful lot to Hollywood history. Really, I mean, like the big names of Hollywood, they're there, and she wasn't there at the time. She can look back on letters and see what people say, but that's her ancestor, and so I really didn't ask her. What did he do? What did he say? I don't think that's right, and I don't think none of us were there. So she couldn't tell me what came out of his mouth, and I can't attribute anything directly to him either. We can only suppose what happened. I'm not going to speak ill, of somebody that was a dear friend, of Paul Bern for a long time. So, but she does support Paul's work and his legacy and thinks it's deserving of being recognized. And, she wrote a letter for me. I sent in letters from people that were well known and, doing research in Hollywood supporting this. They weren't moved by it.
Yeah, that's a shame. What is there a specific organization that people can target and just send inquiries or ask them to please consider Paul Bern?
When I originally sent my very first application, they do say they don't take, lists of names, but I still sent them a list of over 200 people that supported it that I gathered in a very short time. I think it certainly could not hurt for them to hear from people saying, this is somebody that you really should consider. So I would say, please write them a letter. Please call them and say, consider this man. We recognize his body of work. You may not know what he's done, but we recognize what he's contributed. And there's a spot on the Walk of Fame right near Jean Harlow where they could rest in peace together forever, in Hollywood history.
When was Jean Harlow's star made?
I don't know the exact year.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could find it out.
I haven't a clue.
She was alive.
Oh, she was?
No,
Okay.
maybe she wasn't. I'm trying to think. I think I might be confusing that with when she did the Grauman's Chinese Theater.
Oh, okay.
Because clearly she was alive for that because she signed her name and her footprints are there and there are photos of her doing that. But I don't know the first year that the stars were started and when people were grandfathered in. It may have been after her.
Yeah. I feel like it was a little bit, but I have not researched that very much.
I should have looked it up. That would have been relevant to know, and I'm sorry I didn't.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. We can find out, and it's all right. But, Laura, I really appreciate you coming on here, and I feel like this is a subject that's obviously near and dear to your heart, and it's becoming near and dear to mine as well. And it does seem a shame to, just keep this man's name and legacy away from other people's hearts. So,
just as a brief aside, I know you're wrapping up, but to say just how he's been relevant today, the movie that Quentin Tarantino just did, Once Upon a Time, it centers on his home, and part of it was actually filmed there.
I did not know that.
You know what? And also, let me tell you what day years ago, and I can look up the date, I was watching Jeopardy, and Paul Bern was part about Jean Harlow, but Paul Bern was part of the answer. I mean, so he's still current. And, you know, people are still writing books. I mean, E.J. Fleming's book is not that old. I've looked on the internet for research. People are writing articles about Hollywood history all the time. So he's present in people's minds today. And I'm happy for anybody with any idea to reach out to me through you or to contact me directly. Anybody that wants to help me and work on this, I would truly appreciate it.
Yeah, well,
and I know Paul would.
Absolutely. Anything else that you want to add?
I don't think, just, you know, as we said, that I really believe, you know, it's not based on a fallacious story. This is based on his legacy and the work he did, the person he was, and what he contributed. And that's what I want him to be remembered for.
Thanks again to Laura Riebman for her contribution. And it's really great to hear from somebody related to a Hollywood legend. That's Paul Bern. And Laura, you contributed a lot to this podcast. And now listen to my interview with Sherry Snyder.
Hello, and now we are talking with Sherry Snyder. Sherry, of course, we've talked with before on the podcast about Barbara Lamar, the actress that was too beautiful for Hollywood. So, Sherry, welcome back to the program. I really appreciate you coming back and talking to us about Paul Bern and his relationship with Barbara Lamar.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I want to give everyone a chance that didn't hear the podcast before with us, with you, to talk about your book for a couple of minutes. Tell us about your book.
Well, for anyone wanting to learn more about the fabulous Barbara, I've authored her biography. It was per the request of her son, and it's Barbara Lamar, the girl who was too beautiful for Hollywood. It was published the end of 2017 by the University Press of Kentucky, and as I discussed at length on the Barbara Lamar podcast we did together, Barbara, whose real name was Retha Watson, was ordered under threat of arrest in home in El Centro, California at age 17 by juvenile authorities on the grounds that she was too beautiful to remain in the city unsupervised, and she'd been living in Los Angeles against her parents' wishes. So then years later, as a film star, Barbara would be known as the girl who was too beautiful and the too beautiful girl. It was sort of the same way that Clara Bow is known as the it girl, and so that was the inspiration for my book's title, Barbara Lamar, the girl who was too beautiful for Hollywood. And by the way, I have a tribute website. It's barbaralamar.net, and that's Lamarr. And then I also have the Facebook page, which is Barbara Lamar, the girl who was too beautiful for Hollywood. And it's basically a Barbara Lamar tribute page, and I sometimes post information when I do book signings and things like that.
Yes, and read the book, subscribe to the page on Facebook, and definitely look at that website. And Sherry, what I've said to you before about the website, what I really enjoy is not only all the lovely photos, but the filmography portion where you discuss the movie and also discuss where it can be seen or how it can be seen. And of course, in most cases, they're lost films, but we appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to know where to find movies, and there's so little of her out there, but we appreciate you holding that candle, and that's what I try to do on this podcast, is try to get everyone to know the people that are almost gone or almost lost.
Sure.
Well, and speaking of course, this podcast tonight is dedicated to Paul Bern, and the reason why I had you on here is because Paul Bern and Barbara Lamar did have a long time relationship, And so tell us what you know about their relationship.
Well, I can tell you what I know about Paul, because then their relationship will make more sense within the context of that. But from his humble beginnings as a German immigrant born in 1889 and arriving in the United States in 1898, Paul attended the prestigious American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, and he worked as a stage manager, an actor, and a film cutter before moving to Los Angeles and ascending the film industry's ranks, ultimately writing, directing, and producing films for the major studios: Paramount, Warner Brothers, Goldwyn, Louis B. Mayer Productions, famous players Lasky, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, among others. And he worked with such stars as Greta Garbo, John and Lionel Barrymore, Clark Gable, Norma Shearer, Joan Crawford, Mabel Normand, Marion Davies, and Pola Negri. He had a discerning eye for talent, and he helped launch, for instance, platinum bombshell Jean Harlow's meteoric career, and he also influenced the stellar acting careers of others with whom he worked. And while he was with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, he directed, supervised, and produced films, and he co-produced the Oscar-winning drama Grand Hotel, which was released in 1932, and a period columnist described Paul as possessing one of the most brilliant minds in the film world. But beyond his professional achievements is the impression he often made upon the hearts of those who knew and worked with him. He was recognized in his day as Hollywood's father confessor. People really felt as though they could confide in him, and he was also known as the Good Samaritan of Hollywood. And there are so many accounts of his generosity and kindness. And for instance, he helped feed poverty-stricken children in Los Angeles. And one of my favorite Paul Bern stories is that he once gave a destitute young actress the opportunity to attend a major industry networking ball by anonymously sending her a beautiful gown, and he comforted various stars, including Barbara Lamar, and actresses Mabel Normand and Lucille Rickson as their deaths approached. And incidentally, to cheer up Joan Crawford, a friend of his, when she was going through a period of deep discouragement, Paul gifted her a black feathered fan that had adorned Barbara's bedroom during the final weeks of Barbara's life. And Paul told Joan he believed Barbara would want her to have the fan. And Joan greatly admired Barbara and her acting talent, and it was said that Joan cherished the fan the rest of her life. Well, Paul's MGM colleagues declared him the most charitable, most gracious, best liked, most respected man they'd ever met. And Robert Carville, who was Barbara Lamar's one-time dance partner and lover, he insisted that to know Paul was to love him. And he added that Paul didn't seem to care for money and fame, but he only wanted to make the world a happier place for people to live in. And well, Paul's character has been obscured, however, since his death at age 42 in 1932. And 2 months before he died, he married Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer star Jean Harlow. And this is when he was working as a producer and a director at MGM. Then, on Labor Day morning, Paul's butler found Paul dead on his bedroom floor with a gunshot wound to his head. MGM kingpin Louis B. Mayer, MGM security chief Whitey Hendry, and MGM publicity man Howard Strickling soon arrived at the scene. Mayer, very protective of his studio and its image, allegedly wanted to eradicate any possibility that Jean Harlow might be implicated in Paul's death and subsequently in a major scandal. At least 2.5 hours elapsed before police were called to the house. Precisely what occurred during this time, as well as the details surrounding Paul's death, will likely never be fully known. Well, Paul's death was ultimately ruled a suicide. MGM and MGM doctor Edward Jones, who claimed to be Paul's personal physician, announced that Paul killed himself because of depression resulting from a lack of marital relations. Basically, the studio said Paul was impotent. Paul's family and friends dismissed the announcement as ludicrous, and Jean Harlow never supported it, despite the studio purportedly pressuring her to do so. And actress Louise Brooks said, Paul got into more beds with his culture than any wolf in Hollywood. And well, the coroner's office found nothing in the autopsy to suggest Paul was impotent. But damage to Paul's reputation was nonetheless done. Various rumors arose in the wake of his death, rumors that, ironically, even gossip columnist Harrison Carroll described as vicious and untrue. It was said, for instance, that Paul beat Jean and that he was homosexual, and these claims were refuted by those close to Paul and Jean. But the story didn't end there. The night before Paul was found dead, after Jean left the house for an overnight visit at her mother's home, one of the neighbors saw a woman arrive by limousine at Paul and Jean's house. Well, both Paul and Jean's cook and one of their neighbors said they overheard a very heated argument between Paul and a female voice in the middle of the night. The cook, after later hearing what she described as an unearthly scream, said that she emerged from the servants' quarters and witnessed a woman fleeing from the house. In the immediate aftermath of Paul's death, Paul's brother, Henry Bern, told reporters that until Paul died, he supported a deranged woman in New York. Paul met this woman, a one-time actress named Dorothy Millette, around 1911. And Henry further stated that although no marriage had taken place between Paul and Dorothy, Paul considered himself morally married to her. And they lived together for many years until Dorothy's mental health deteriorated and Paul was forced to place her in a sanitarium. By the end of 1920, Paul, heartbroken, had moved to Los Angeles. And Dorothy was ultimately released from the sanitarium, not cured, but believed by her doctor to be harmless, and moved into a New York hotel under the name Mrs. Paul Bern. And she remained there for about 10 years, supporting herself with regular checks that Paul sent her. In the spring of 1932, just months before Paul's death, Dorothy left New York for the Plaza Hotel in San Francisco, much to Paul's dismay. At times, when she was still in the New York sanitarium, she didn't acknowledge Paul's presence when he visited. Now, however, she was determined to see him. It appears that she wanted him to star her in films. Well, Paul and Jean's cook later identified Dorothy as the woman she saw bolting from the house the night before Paul was discovered dead. And Dorothy rushed to an awaiting limousine and was taken back to San Francisco, reportedly imploring the driver repeatedly to go faster, go faster. The police investigating Paul's death would never have the chance to find out what Dorothy knew, because she was last seen aboard a steamship headed for Sacramento the day after Paul was found dead, and her body was soon discovered in a Sacramento tributary. It was an apparent suicide, and I don't think we'll ever know exactly what happened. There were multiple people on the scene for at least 2.5 hours before authorities were summoned, so we can never know what might have happened during that time. And Paul's gardener, who viewed Paul's body after Paul's butler found him, told investigators that he believed Paul was murdered. And it's been suggested that perhaps the gardener didn't see the gun that was later found by police beneath Paul's body, and that's very possible. But curiously, MGM security head Whitey Hendry, who, as I said, was on the scene along with Louis B. Mayer and Howard Strickling long before police, was later said to have related privately, so it's not an official statement, but he was said to have said that Paul was, quote, lying in the closet and the gun was on the floor halfway across the room. Whoever killed him threw it there. It didn't walk there, end quote. But Yet when Detective Joseph Whitehead surveyed the scene, he observed a gun on a nearby dressing table, and then the gun clasped in Paul's hand and positioned beneath his body. And this in and of itself doesn't prove Paul was murdered, of course, but even with a suicide, the exact motive is a bit of a mystery, at least in my mind, though it would certainly seem that Dorothy played a role somehow or factored into it. Jean Harlow, when questioned by authorities, stated there was nothing between herself and Paul that she could think of that would have caused him to kill himself, and I don't believe he was impotent. Paul's brother Henry was appalled by the alleged suicide motive, and he traveled from his home in New York to California to conduct an investigation of his own. And he met with Jean Harlow and various persons at MGM, including Louis B. Mayer, and then Henry stated to the press before returning to New York that he was still unconvinced of any particular suicide motive. And unfortunately, as I'm sure my friend Laura Reedman explained during her interview with you, I don't think the family ever had closure. His family never really discussed his death. It was just simply too painful. And sadly, the rumors that arose about Paul after his death hurt just as much. But I know you asked about what the relationship was like between Barbara and Paul. It makes more sense within the context of the whole picture, as you'll see. But it's such an intricate picture. It's believed that Barbara and Paul met in California around 1921, and it's believed that a romance between them began by about late 1921. And Virginia Carville, one of Barbara's closest friends, told her great niece that there was indeed a romance between them. And at the time, Barbara was about 25 years old, almost 7 years younger than Paul, and she was headed for superstardom as a silent film actress. She had a successful career as a child actress in stock theater, and then in adulthood, she'd had a successful career as a dancer in some of the nation's most popular cabarets and even on Broadway. And she also had a career as a vaudevillian, and then later she was a story writer for the Fox Film Corporation. So at the time that she and Paul were romantically linked, a series of film roles would soon lead her to a contract to make starring pictures. So she was on her way up, and given that Barbara and Paul were very much alike in certain ways, it's easy to see why they were drawn to each other. They were both highly intelligent, and they were extremely sensitive individuals. Paul was said to really suffer himself when those he cared about suffered, and Barbara was unable to turn her back on family and friends, pretty much anyone in need. And like Paul, Barbara was exceedingly generous and compassionate. Among other generous acts, she went so far as to invite struggling artists into her Whitley Heights home to live with her until they got on their feet. And in time, Barbara would consider Paul to be her closest male friend. He was very aware of her turbulent, infamous past, her bigamous marriage and multiple husbands, among other things, much of which I discussed in our Barbara podcast, and he overlooked her past. She referred to him as the understanding heart. Well, at one point, the press suspected that they might get married. But Barbara, when asked about her relationship with Paul by a reporter, commented that, "Dear Paul is the only man I have ever known who has permitted me to love him as a friend." And incidentally, journalist Adela Rogers St. John's, in an interview with Jean Harlow after Paul's death, recounted a confidential conversation she claimed took place between herself and Barbara. And in it, Barbara, according to St. John's, said she wouldn't marry Paul because of his impotence. But St. John's, she was a compelling writer, but she tended to fictionalize a good deal in her writings, and really the impotence claim lacks support. But I suspect Paul's relationship with Dorothy might well have factored into his romance with Barbara. Paul tended to speak openly with friends he trusted, and so I believe that Barbara was probably aware of his relationship with Dorothy. In fact, Paul told at least one of his close friends in the early 1920s that if ever Dorothy regained her sanity, he hoped to resume his married life with her. And Barbara was merely separated from her husband Ben Dealey when she was romantically linked to Paul. But Paul nonetheless loved Barbara deeply to the end of her life in 1926 and even beyond that. His love for her sometimes tortured him, though. Actress Leatrice Joy, Paul and Barbara's mutual friend, recalled how Paul once waited for Barbara at a party in a hillside home with an orchid corsage and diamond bracelet in hand. And then, when Barbara didn't show up at the party as apparently promised, Paul flung the corsage and bracelet into the brush outside. So, party guests, of course, they looked for that bracelet, but I don't think it was ever found. But even after Paul's romance with Barbara cooled and she moved on to other lovers, Paul stuck by her as one of her closest, most loyal friends. And when his friends questioned his continued devotion to her, he explained that Barbara has a lamentable taste in lovers and needs protection. And he even stood by Barbara during what was undoubtedly the worst chapter in her life. She was really suffering by 1925. Her lungs were rapidly weakening, and also her once stellar film acting career hovered on the brink of collapse. Her starring contract had resulted in 2 box office flops, and then a series of scandals had likewise caused her to slip from public favor. And Paul was purported by one of his friends to have adapted the scenario for what ended up being Barbara's final film, The Girl from Montmartre, and that was released in 1926, right after her death. And he was no doubt wanting to help her achieve the comeback she so desperately wanted, and he adapted the film anonymously and evidently without Barbara's knowledge. That he didn't even receive credit for it. But in late 1925, when Barbara, deep in debt and battling incipient pulmonary tuberculosis, was ordered by her doctor to retreat to Altadena, California, which was known at the time for its pristine air, to rest in isolation for several months and to hopefully try to regain her health, Paul helped her pay for her rented bungalow, and he assisted with her medical expenses. And Barbara said, "No one is really poor who can boast the friendship of Paul Bern," and he visited her faithfully too, by the way, reputedly every day early before going to work at MGM. And another of my favorite Paul Bern stories, but this is a bit of a sad one. Barbara was really desperate to pay off as much of her debt as she could before she died, and she asked Paul to please sell her Rolls Royce. Well, that was a gift he had given her, and he couldn't bring himself to sell it. He wanted so much to believe that she would recover and one day drive it again. So he told her he sold it, and he gave her some money, but in reality, he'd hidden the car in a garage. But then when she asked him to watch over her 3-year-old son in the event that she didn't recover, he assured her he would. And sadly, Barbara passed away at age 29 on January 30th, 1926, from pulmonary tuberculosis and nephritis. And Robert Carville, Barbara's friend, and as I said, one-time dance partner and lover, stated that Barbara, not long before her passing, spoke of hating to leave Paul. And Robert quotes her as saying that Paul is too fine and too noble and too sensitive for this cruel world. I wish he were going with me. And Paul served as an honorary pallbearer at her funeral, and reportedly he paid for her funeral. And not only that, but he was said by Robert Carville to have provided the money with which Barbara's crypt was purchased. And that's another interesting story, is that, well, before Barbara died, she spoke to her parents of her wish to be cremated, and that was the least expensive way to go about things. And according to Barbara's son, Paul wouldn't allow it. He said she's too beautiful. And he convinced her father to cancel the cremation. And then now Barbara is interred in a crypt in the beautiful cathedral mausoleum in what is today known as Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. So he certainly, he helped her out tremendously in her life and even after the fact. And it was said at the time of her death in 1926 that he attempted suicide. In fact, later, in the aftermath of Paul's death in 1932, actor John Gilbert, a good friend of Paul's, told the press that he saved Paul from what he described as possible suicide after Paul brooded for days over Barbara's death. And John Gilbert really didn't provide any details. He explained at the time that the circumstances are too close to my heart for me to disclose, and Paul denied that Barbara's death prompted him to attempt suicide, but John Gilbert's account ultimately took on an absurd life of its own. Paul was later rumored to have attempted to kill himself by submerging his head in a toilet bowl, and when Barbara married her final husband, actor Jack Dougherty, but in reality, Paul facilitated the wedding ceremony by helping the couple obtain their license, and he even helped Jack purchase a ring for Barbara, and then he acted as best man at the ceremony. So I think it's just one of those rumors that was started. But Paul kept his promise to Barbara, and he looked out for her son. Actress Zazou Pitts, a close friend of Barbara's, and Zazou's husband, actor and boxing promoter Tom Gallery, adopted the boy after Barbara died, and they renamed him Donald Gallery. But Paul regularly visited him and took him little toys and took him on outings, and even sometimes he brought Jean Harlow along. So he was definitely a man of his word, and he looked out for him all the way up until his death, as I said.
One of a kind, that's for sure. And of course, the real interesting thing about this whole scenario is, and it's interesting, but it's extremely tragic, is that all the players that we have been talking about, Paul, of course, and Barbara, and then you go to Jean Harlow, they all died very young, and
they did.
Yeah, and I always wonder what would happen if Paul Bern had lived a long life and Irving Thalberg had lived a long life. I kind of wonder if they would have pushed Louis B. Mayer to the side and said, "Here, go over here to your desk and do some paperwork. We're going to go produce a movie." I often wonder what in the world would have happened if those two would have lived long lives.
Well, they certainly had a great chemistry, and I think they would have continued making great films for MGM. And yes, it's such a shame what we've lost when by them dying so young, because you're right, they really produced some excellent films, and I'm sure they would have produced many more.
Yeah, Grand Hotel was that's about as good as a movie as it gets. Nobody ever says, "Oh, what's your favorite movie?" No one ever says Grand Hotel, but man, that is just such a wonderful film with such a heart and emotion, and it's got some just wonderful actors, and I really adore that movie.
Yeah, really an all-star cast.
Yeah, it was kind of like an apex for both of them, and then of course Irving Thalberg lived a little longer and then produced a few more movies, but we lost him too soon as well. But I really appreciate So, one more thing, incidentally, Sherry, why do you think the relationship between, the romantic relationship that is, between Paul Bern and Barbara Lamar didn't work out completely?
Well, let's just say that one of Barbara's most well-known quotes is, "I take lovers like roses by the dozen." And dancer Philip Ainsworth, one of her several husbands, remarked long after their divorce, "Barbara is a nice girl, but she just can't stick to anything, not even to a husband." But interestingly, about 2 years before Barbara died, she was quoted as saying, and this, by the way, was during a time when she was very disillusioned with romance and husbands. She tended to go back and forth between actively seeking the love of her life and completely swearing men off altogether. Of course, that didn't last very long. She usually found someone to fall in love with. But during a time when, about 2 years before she passed away, she was quoted as saying that her ideal man would have to be just her friend. She evidently wanted a real friendship, something she knew she wasn't going to lose, not a hot and heavy infatuation that would last for a little while and then burn out as her infatuations ultimately did. And she also mentioned that her ideal man would have to understand her. She said that understanding is the greatest gift you can give anyone, and it's the greatest gift anyone can give you. And I find it curious that Paul, she had those qualities in Paul. She called him the understanding heart, and she said he is the only man who has ever allowed me to love him as a friend. So I suspect that she didn't want to lose his friendship. She didn't want to have a romance if it meant risking their friendship, because it was just too precious to her.
Right. Well, Sherry, I really appreciate very much you coming on here and talking to us about Barbara one more time, and also obviously your knowledge about Paul Bern is pretty high. And for anybody listening, you need to order Sherry's book. Just tell us about the book one more time, Sherry, and tell us about the page and your website.
Well, my tribute website is barbaralamar.net, and I have all kinds of photos on there, and as you mentioned, I have a filmography section where I list all of the films Barbara wrote and also appeared in, and lucky for us, some of her most noteworthy work has survived, and some of it is even available online to view for free, and I include the links to where certain of her films may be viewed for free online, and then I provide information where other films of hers may be accessed. But I also wrote her biography, as I mentioned. It is Barbara Lamar, the girl who was too beautiful for Hollywood, and that was published just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and then you have the Facebook page too.
Right, Barbara Lamar, the girl who was too beautiful for Hollywood, same as the book.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, you read this book, you're guaranteed, if you don't shed a tear reading this book, then you don't have a conscience, or you don't have feelings or something, because it's just it's a really compelling book, and it's hard to put down, and it's chock full of information, and it took you a long time to write that book too. So.
Well, 10 years I researched and wrote, and Barbara is such an incredible person, and I was just so honored to write about her and her life. If you wrote it as fiction, no one would believe it.
Right. No, there's too much there, right?
That incredible. She's just a very, this has been one of the most wonderful journeys of my life, really. So I was very honored to do it, and thank you for your kind words about it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And as I had said to you earlier, I'm also going to be reposting the podcast with you where we talk exclusively about Barbara, and that will post a few days after this one. And so I hope everybody who didn't have a chance to listen to it gets to listen to it, and maybe even if you did listen to it before, maybe you'll listen again. But Sherry, thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. I appreciate you having me.
All right, Sherry. Good night.
Bye-bye.
So that was Sherry Snyder, and again, what a wonderful guest she is. And it also was wonderful to have Laura Reedman on the show as well, talking about her uncle, Paul Bern. And Paul definitely deserves a spot on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And I know this is a passion of Laura's, and I know there's a lot of people that agree with her, and so we need to do whatever we can. And this podcast is all about preserving the memories of people that otherwise maybe would have just been completely forgotten. And Barbara Lamar was a wonderful, wonderful film star, very talented stage actress, and also writer. Paul Bern was also a talented writer, also a talented director and producer, and he produced Grand Hotel, one of the best films of all time, with some of the best stars that have ever lived. And I think Paul Bern deserves a spot on the Hollywood Walk of Fame with the people that were appearing in his movies. Well, thank you so much for listening. I am David Heath, and you've been listening to Cinema Chat, where we talk about the movies and the people that made them.